Hi, guys. Welcome back to another edition of Chats from the Blog Cabin. Today, we're going to be talking all about music and how music can heal you as well as help learning. And I'm very honored to have John join us today. But before we get into what you do, John, tell us who you are. Give us a little tidbit about yourself.
Sure. My name is John Foley, and I'm a musician, a music therapist, author of 2 books. Most happy to be dad for 2 great grown kids. And so I'm just basically shifting gears here as I move out of one phase of my life into the next. And so I guess that's a little bit of what we could talk about today as well.
Yeah, so let's first talk about music. Have you always wanted to be a musician?
From early on, actually, although funny thing was, it was the Beatles that did it for me. Before the Beatles hit, I wasn't that interested. After the Beatles hit, I didn't think about too much else. So it really, you could pretty much draw a line there. And that happened for a lot of the other musicians I know who were my age. And then, so I went through the usual bits with rock and roll bands. And we had one of our press releases said we had a record that made it all the way to the radio and all the way back. And that was about where it's at. And then, but I continued working as a musician after that.
And that led you into being a music therapist. Now, tell us what a music therapist is.
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I knew. But it basically was something like this. There are almost as many kinds of music therapy as there are music therapists. Specifically, I went into the part of it that worked with children and young adults on the autism spectrum, developmental disabilities and the rest. But I think in a more general sense, the first thing they told us when I started the music therapy program was to think of the difference between music therapy and what they called therapeutic music. You know, we all put music on to relax us or to energize us for exercise or maybe to get creative while we're cooking. And that's great. We should all do even more of that. But that's music used in a therapeutic way. Music therapy looks at the effects that music can have, tries to understand them so we can use them more effectively. Like the simplest example I ever had was, if you think of how often we set something to music to help us remember. I mean, when somebody first sent the alphabet to that old French melody, they understood on some level that that helps us remember, that there's something in the structure of putting something with a melody and a rhythm that prints it into our brain better. So now with music therapy, we look at something that we've always known and we try and understand it in a little more deeper level so we can use it more effectively.
Now, was there a reason why you went to the autism side of the therapy?
Initially, I just went in. I didn't really know too much about it. I had done some work with geriatrics, and as part of my training, I worked in an adult psychiatric ward. So we, pretty much had the whole gamut there. But I did have a chance during my training to work with some kids on the autism spectrum, and something just clicked. I just said, this is really something I could see myself doing for a long time. And it was terrific. It was very rewarding, and I enjoyed all of it.
Now, do you have to have special qualifications to be a music therapist?
Yes. And there's a degree that you get. It's similar to a music education degree, what you would get to go teach music in the school system. But for music therapy, there are just little bits of things that are emphasized more on the other side. But yes, so I had an undergraduate degree in music. And so I went back and took another couple of semesters to get the certification in music therapy. And it really is important because, as I said, there are a lot of ways to use music in a therapeutic sense, but to really get a music therapist perspective on things, if somebody is looking for help with that, it helps to have someone who's had the training, yes.
So honestly, tell us about some of the experience, because you said you worked with kids on the autism spectrum.
Right.
Tell us about some of your experiences working with these kids, because I think a lot of people don't realize that autism, it may be a disorder, but they're just ordinary people just like us.
Well, that's it. And it's such as a reason they refer to the spectrum, because there are people there who you would not think were at all affected. And then there were people you would know had some serious issues. And a couple of the things I noticed is that we would have people singing who would not speak. There were children who did not talk, but they will sing with you. And then what you try and do is you work on that to get them to say things in a little bit of a sing-songy way, and a little closer to speech. And then little by little, you can get them to using something that you and I would consider more like everyday speech. It takes a long time, and it's a long process. But that was a great thing to see. You see kids who didn't want to talk, who wanted to sing. So they had to, they had that thing they had to get out there, and we had to work around whatever it was preventing them. And with same thing on the physical front, worked with the physical therapists a lot, because there are, just to use a almost silly example, there's a divide in the middle of the brain. And a lot of the kids on the spectrum, if you hand them something and you move your hand from side to side, they will follow you to the middle, and then they'll switch to their other hand, because they're not getting that communication across the two hemispheres of the brain. So we came up with a thing called the elbow mambo, where you have to do this. And, I don't really think too often about how easy that might be, but for them, it's not. So often we would have a teacher or an aide saying, I have to get a camera. I didn't think they could do that. But partly because it's music and it's fun, and they would look around, they'd see all their friends dancing and going like that. So they would join in. And so you can even work on physical therapy goals, occupational therapy goals with fingering and things like that. So yeah, we found that it applied itself to just about everything.
Now, did you work in a school system, or did you work as a consultant, or how did that work?
I worked as a consultant. I went to various schools. A lot of the schools would have their programs, separate programs for kids with developmental disabilities, which when I started actually was more heavily on the cerebral palsy side of things. But now autism is so prevalent that most of the kids I see have some form of autism. And so with something like that, we basically, I would go to the school and say, here's the program. I'm self-contained. I will bring it in on your schedule. And so I would go to schools 5 days a week doing that. Now, obviously, with the pandemic, we weren't doing that. I was doing a lot of remote classes, which are a challenge too, as anyone who's had to do something remotely will tell you. So it's.
So let's talk about the first time that you saw a light bulb go off on one of the children that you were in music therapy with, because you were talking about just a minute ago about the kids that won't even talk, and all of a sudden they're singing. Let's talk about how you felt.
Well, that again, it was tremendously rewarding to see something like that. Like to see, to use the other song as an example, you would get a nonverbal child, and they would come up and request the elbow mambo, like they would walk up to you and do that. And so then you've really made some connection with somebody. And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the kids were using music to really express themselves. So, the older kids, or the kids who already speak well, they were trying to express themselves emotionally. And music does a great job of that too. So they would be able to sing things that they might not say to you or to me.
Now, did you see that did the teachers notice a change in the way they behaved in the classroom with the music as well, with music therapy?
Yes. Yeah. And again, it was not, there were no miracle cures. It's not like we went in and everything was fine. But people did notice there were kids who would not sit, who will sit for music, which sort of makes sense. I mean, it's entertainment as much as anything else sometimes. But yes, they would certainly find an effect while we were there, and then there would be a little bit of a holdover, and the next week you weren't necessarily starting from scratch. So it was a slow process, but we would be able to build up. And the kids, they would say the kids would look forward to it all week, or they would use a little extra music time as an incentive for doing some other chore. So that was actually kind of nice when I would see that some of the kids, if they did accomplish certain things, their little treat was to be able to have an extra music class.
Oh, wow. I know that means a lot. I come from a teaching background as well. Yeah. So okay. I can see that.
Yeah. So yeah, it is really rewarding.
Now, what do you think this is a total different topic, and I didn't see you this talking point, but what do you think about them cutting the arts in school now?
Well, pretty much what you think, I think. It's a terrible idea. I understand that people are looking at this and they're trying to say, well, we'd like to do everything, but we can't afford it. But I just think it's such a short-sighted thing, because the arts and all the rest of it have so much to do with development. And that, there's all sorts of studies that show that kids who are involved in music or art do better in school.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more openly seeking new things to do, new ideas. And yeah, I understand that if somebody's sitting down there with a balance sheet and they say something doesn't add up, I know they think they have to cut something that seems to be non-essential, but I think that's wrong.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so now you're into, you've got your music degree, you're a music therapist.
Right.
Did you play gigs on the side as well?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Partly because it's, no one goes into music therapy for the money, but but also just, I love to play anyway. So I was able to play with friends on the weekends or things like that. And, it was a little low key. The work with the band had involved traveling, and that was a real full-time commitment, which was fun at the time. But one of the reasons I had left that was we had two young kids here, and I didn't want to do that. But playing on the weekends was great. Yeah, I did. I suppose we probably would call it classic rock now because it's old. But at the time I was playing it first, it was just rock and roll.
I love that, classic rock, because you said now it's old, but actually I grew up around classic rock too, so I totally know what you're talking about. So
Yeah,
what kind of music did you play?
What
particular ones?
Yeah, basically the rock and roll from the 1960s to the 1980s for the most part. It's not like I wouldn't play anything later, but I mean, those were the decades that I probably related to the most. Those are the ones where I played and listened to that music more often than anything else. And yeah, we would find that it wasn't just people our age. People would bring their kids who were big Beatles fans or really liked the Beach Boys or the Rolling Stones or something. So, and then we would find that you can go anywhere in the world and play a Motown song, and everybody wants to sing, everybody wants to dance. So it's great in that sense. It's not really just for our age group.
Now you're a new musician, so where did your love of writing, obviously, because you've got 2 books, come from?
I think I just love to read, and I would bet that everybody who loves to read secretly thinks they might want to write as well. So I think with something like that, I just always thought it might be fun, and I never really had done much. I did a couple of articles for professional journals and things like that, but I had never really done too much. And I sat down to write an article on human response to music, our reactions to things, how our reactions change emotionally, intellectually. And I started to write, and I kept on writing, and I couldn't stop. And eventually I had that. So, and it was book length. And I said, okay, it's a book. It's not an article anymore. So yeah, that one started out really pretty narrow. And then I went back into the history and science of music. And to illustrate each point, I bring in an example from something that I had seen myself, either playing or as a music therapist. And yeah, I was very happy with the way that came out. And so I said, okay, well, maybe you should continue to write. And so for a long time, I really couldn't come up with something else. And then I was doing an article for Renaissance magazine, which is mostly a history buffs thing. And I was writing on the history of music and healing, which was very probably first really studied in a systematic way during the Renaissance. And when I was doing my research, I came across this phenomenon, which happened hundreds of times over hundreds of years, where people would have these spontaneous outbreaks of dancing, uncontrolled dancing. I mean, dancing longer than you think a human being could stand up. And it was just, now it's considered a mass psychogenic episode if you read the literature on it. But at first, of course, they thought it was possession or some sort of haunting or something. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. So I put that into the article. The article came out, and I pretty much forgot about it until I was going to try my hand at a novel. And for 20 years, I'd been thinking, I'd love to write a novel set in Tudor England. And I think anybody who likes to read history, there's probably a temptation to think, well, what would my life have been back in those times? And at the time I started to do this, I was a traveling musician. So I said, well, I wonder what would happen to a traveling musician in the days of Henry VIII. And I started to get this story going, and I liked it. And I was working it. And then all of a sudden, one day I sat down, and the whole bit about what was then called the dancing plague, this dancing mania, popped up as one of the little subplots in the book early on. And all of a sudden, all of the other themes in the book started to dovetail. And so the book became The Dancing Beast, which is the name that one of the characters has when he sees how this mob of people starts to act as one, almost as one thing, And so it got away from me again, and it became an adventure, it became a romance, it became a mystery, it became all these things. And I got to the end, and I said, "Boy, I like this book." And so it's been out for a while, and I was really hesitant to try my friends over in England on it because I thought they would say, "Well, this is not your history. What are you doing? You've got a lot of cheek." But my friends, and not just friends, people over there, according to Amazon UK, got some very nice mentions. So we're selling on 2 continents, but I was very happy that the people in England didn't think I was messing around with their history.
So basically, it started as a research project, and then you just decided to get it into a work of fiction.
Yeah, and it was funny. And originally, they were 2 separate things. I did the article for the history magazine. It was published, and a couple of years later, I was starting what I thought was just this little Tudor English adventure story. And then all of a sudden, the bit about the dancing plague, which the character calls the dancing beast, pops up, and I said, "Well, that's a perfect little way to inject some more action in here. We've already had our tavern brawl, we've already had our escape from the burning building, and now I don't want it just to be talk, and I need something else to happen." And I remembered the research I'd done on the dancing plague, and I said, "That's absolutely correct. It's historically accurate for the period." And it really did fit in with the other themes that the book was working on.
So you have to be a lover of history as well, at least music history, right?
Well, yes. Well, and actually, that's funny. That's how it worked, because I'm not maybe across the board a history buff. But when I was in college, I was lucky. I had 2 professors who were real fans of what is usually called early music. Anything before Bach, it's sort of like early music. And unless you specialize in that, they don't spend a lot of time on it. But I had 2 professors who were really interested in it, and they sent us off on this great adventure, looking for all of these concerts by musicians playing music from the 15th, 16th centuries. And I just got caught up in it. It had this sort of magical sense to it. It was sort of like transporting you back. And then I saw, I happened to see a couple of Shakespeare productions, and so the whole thing sort of worked itself together for me, and I really just got attracted to the period, and I started reading the history and going back and doing a little more of the other research. But yeah, music was the door into that as well.
So, do you have any plans to write any more books?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was pleasantly surprised that some of the early readers of The Dancing Beast said, "I have to find out what happens to these guys." So and gals. So it's a standalone novel, so it's a self-contained story. If anybody wants to read it, they can they can enjoy it without having to commit. You don't have to. But I was feeling the same thing at the end of the book. I wanted to know what happens to these people in the next phase of their lives. So I don't think the thing was finished for very long before I started on the sequel. So I have at least one more book in the Dancing Beast series in the works, currently being written, and I have done some video trailers for the thing where I use some period artwork, and I compose some music to go along with it. So there's I see the website down there. So anyone who would like to go to the website, you scroll down the first page, and there's a video trailer. It's 5 minutes of mostly Renaissance art and some music that I wrote. And I got some great narration. There's a woman who lives around here. She's from New York State, but she has a fabulous English accent. And so she's reading portions of the book with the artwork and the music. And it's a lot of fun. And we have 2 more in the works right now.
So where do you get your inspiration for writing? I know you said that you got the inspiration for this particular one by the article and the Dancing Plague. But
Right.
where, like you said, there was a fire, there was other things happening in this book. Where did you get the inspiration from?
Well, that's a funny thing. I've been since to writers' workshops and things like that. And I was at this one, and this woman was talking about how she writes. She says, I sit down, I have a timeline, and I see at which point my character is going to go here and meet this person. They're going to go there, meet that person. And that's how she writes. Then she goes back in and puts in the dialogue and the scenery and the rest. And so I was so far from that. I said, geez, maybe I'm doing this wrong. I sat down with my first three characters and the and the way that they were thrown together. And I didn't know where it was going from there. And then one character would make an observation, and I say, oh, okay, then that may be what's happening. So I actually discovered the story in the same sequence that the reader does. When I started out, I basically had the first chapter or so blocked out in my mind, and everything else was somebody saying this, and I would say, well, maybe that's true. And so I would explore that. And then certain things just came up in that I wasn't trying to be timely, but some things are just universal. For example, I was bringing in a part about how Henry VIII had banished the gypsies, the Romany people, from England at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we hear about people getting banished all over the place nowadays, but at the time I was just putting it in because it was historically part of the period. And one of the characters, I don't want to give away too much, but one of the characters is suspected of having Romany gypsy heritage, and that makes trouble for her because there's prejudice. So 500 years ago, we had the same stuff we were dealing with. So yeah, the little things like that would just suggest themselves, and all of a sudden you take what was a historical fact, like the expulsion of the gypsies, and then it becomes somebody's emotional reality when you realize this isn't something that takes up 2 lines in the history book. This is a whole people who were expelled, and everybody who was suspected of being partially of that ancestry had to deal with that as well. So it was funny. It often starts out with just a little fragment of something, and then it becomes somebody's reality. It becomes a character's emotional reality.
So how long did it take you to write this particular book?
That's a good question. I should have written down, and for some reason, the program I was using at the time doesn't tell you when you started. But I would say it probably took about a year. Usually I would get up in the morning. I get up before everyone else, and I would make some coffee and sit down and start to write. And the only thing I had that was close to a rule was that I wouldn't throw anything out till the next day. So even if I went off on what seemed like a tangent, I wouldn't delete it. I would say, let it percolate. And I'd come back to it the next day. And more often than not, I would say, I can see where that's headed. This is telling, the character is actually trying to show us that she or he is more involved than we thought. So it was funny. I would do that. I would read a speech back and say, nah, they wouldn't say that. But I would not delete it. And the next day I'd read back and say, well, if they did say that, then you have this. And so the plot advances each time by, just by being open to the fact that characters are like people. They surprise us the way people surprise us.
Yeah. Do you think you'll ever write a book that has to deal with music therapy, and there's a character that's autistic in there, since that's something that you deal with a lot? Yeah,
that would be sort of like the exact midpoint between the two books. So you're talking about a work of fiction where there would be a character like that. Yeah, that would be a challenge, because I think, in a way, the only way to do it right would be to include the viewpoint of the autistic person. And I have read a bunch of books by autistic people just to see if I can get a sense of how they see the world, because I would figure, from my point of view, from working with them, I wanted to see what they saw from their side of the lens. So that would be a real challenge. I'm glad you mentioned that. I have to see if I feel up to something like that, because it would be nice, of course, to write something from the standpoint of the people, the teachers or the therapists who work with the kids, and that could be really really good as well. But the real challenge, I think, might be that, to see if you can write it from the standpoint of the person with autism. There's some really good books, fiction and nonfiction, written from the standpoint of characters who are either on the spectrum or suspected to be. I mean, so I think one of the earliest ones I read was The Curious Case of the Dog in the Night. And they never tell you that the narrator is autistic as such, but you're gleaning it as you read. And then, of course, there are a lot of books, including books by Temple Grandin, books by people who themselves live with autism, and they tell us a bit of what it's like from their side. So yeah, that would be a great challenge. Yeah.
Because I was, as you were talking about autistic and writing, there's a blogger that she has a child that her oldest daughter has Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And she actually has written a couple of books where her main character in the book has Down syndrome.
Right.
And it just kind of helps to maybe not normalize, but to help get the perspective of the outsider's perspective on what's going on, so that they know that they're just normal people just like us. They were just, God made them special.
Right. I think that's a great idea. And anytime we can do something that opens up our viewpoint to theirs. I mean, and that's basically what fiction does anyway. The idea in fiction, we're supposed to imagine something that is not our reality. We see characters doing things that we wouldn't do. And so, yeah, I think anything especially with people who are somehow marked as different, anything that kind of makes them a bigger part of a bigger mainstream is a great idea. Yeah, because we need to see that. There's a reason with autism they refer to the spectrum. It's not here's people with autism. It's just there's a line keeps going on forever, and over on the one end of the line are the people we don't think have issues, and on the far end are the people who very obviously do. But most of us, just about everybody, is somewhere in that continuum, in the middle. And I think that's a great test for fiction, if you can really write something from another person's point of view.
I think I asked you this earlier, but remind me again, why did you get involved with autism in particular?
Well, we started to, and I think we may have veered off, but yes, no, I had as part of my training, we worked with different groups. We worked with geriatrics, we worked with adult psychiatric patients, and then we worked with kids with disabilities. And that was just, I just had a real connection there. I really liked, I liked the work. I thought something just seemed to, to mesh. But I really had no experience. A lot of the people that I ended up working with, teachers and aides and the rest, had themselves children who were on the autism spectrum. A lot of special ed teachers have kids who are in special ed. I mean, you can understand why that would be. It makes you interested. It makes you involved. But I had no experience myself with anyone really on the spectrum.
And yet you just fell in love with them as you were going through your career in that particular group.
Yeah, exactly. It just, something just happened, and I said, okay, I really, really feel like, something is being done here. I really feel like a connection is being made, and it was also a tremendous amount of fun. It's just, to sit down with a bunch of kids who are in school and not necessarily happy to be there, and all of a sudden they're happy to be there. I mean, that would be fun regardless of what you do. So yeah, but it is interesting because a lot of the people that I knew who work with special ed themselves have someone in the family, either a child or a sibling. But I had almost no contact with it at all. It was just another world for me.
Wow. So I just want to kind of pick your brain. What does it normally look like when you go into a classroom and you're sitting down with the children? Tell us how because I know there's a lot of them that they're like off on all the different places. How do you get their attention? How do you keep them engaged and everything?
Yeah, well, and that's all kids everywhere. So I mean, that part is not any different really. But usually what we do is we would have, especially if it's kids where I would see them every week at a certain time. And so you try and establish your routine, because especially with people on the autism spectrum, routine and predictability is really, really important. I know a lot of people remember the Dustin Hoffman character in Rain Man, the autistic person, and he would get upset if he couldn't watch his television show at 3:30 or whatever. And I mean, there's no typical autistic person, but that is very common with autism and that kind of thing. So we would try and have a pattern. We would start with, we had a greeting song. So that was always the one we would do. And then, then we would go through certain things. And, but yeah, initially getting somebody to pay attention who doesn't want to, I would develop these little songs where it would require a response. So I would play something on the guitar with a little bit of a beat and hold out a tambourine, say, and have them imitate that beat back to me. I had written a song called Crash, Boom, Bang. So I would play 1, 2, 3 on the guitar, hold out the tambourine, and they would get bang, 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 1, 2, 3 with that same rhythm. So even with the nonverbal kids, you're communicating. You have made a statement, you get a response. And then we would vary that so that they would, I could see that they were tuning into the music. And, a lot of the things, it's interesting, a lot of things work that you would not think would have anything to do with it. But I was looking at a videotape one time, and just even the motion of somebody's arm going like this, it's very, very fascinating, rather fascinating. They found it fascinating, and strings on the guitar that we don't even notice. They're doing this little vibrating thing that we don't see, but a lot of people on the autism spectrum do. So it's this magic, it's this sort of a light show for them. And, just to see something visual, because a lot of people on the autism spectrum are very, very visual. So we would try and do as much as possible things that would engage them visibly first, and then bring the other in, which is where doing the remote classes, as I have this past year, is a lot harder, because it's much harder to engage someone. So I would do little silly things like, put my hand up over the camera or things, because you just need something to help them engage at first.
I'm glad you said that, because that was actually my next question coming up, is how has COVID and the pandemic changed the way you approach it?
Yeah, it's made a huge difference. And part of the thing is that we would do things, I would have kids playing basic instruments. And of course, we can't do that long distance, because one of the other things that becomes an issue, which I never would have thought of before last year, that there's usually, in a lot of these things, there is a second or two time lag. So, if you want to say, if you're working with very small kids and somebody's singing, if you're happy and clap your hands, well, 2 seconds later, somebody's doing that. And it does throw things off. So I do have to, I have to adapt for that. I have flashcards where they're learning to clap rhythms. So instead of having them clap along with me, I hold up the flashcard and I say, count to 4 and play this pattern. And that's how I can tell if they've actually learned a rhythm. But yeah, up till this time last year, I didn't know what I was going to do. So, and so, yes, so it was interesting.
So how much harder has it been to navigate? Because I know that it's hard for actually parents with kids that are on the autism spectrum to keep kids engaged with, but now you're adding the autism spectrum to keep them engaged on something that's on the, the computer all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, yes, because when you're in person with somebody, you're there. You can do this. You can get in front of their eyes and do all the rest of this. And so a lot of that stuff is just out of the toolbox right now. So I just have to worry about trying to do as many things as I can to engage the students, to adapt the things that I used to do to this new world. And, and it's tough, because some of the classes, of course, are in classrooms, and there's all the distractions of a classroom. Or if the child is at home, well, they're at home, and there are plenty of distractions at home too. So yeah, so it's new challenges, which is fun, to be doing something for a long time, and then all of a sudden, as I guess lots of people we know, the things they do, they have to do differently.
I had one interview a while back with the parenting expert that actually said that if this pandemic had happened 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been, the internet wouldn't have been able to accommodate everybody else.
Sure. Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. I guess probably because I don't think that anybody back in those days would have even thought to use it. Although I guess they would, yes, they would have tried to use it and overloaded the circuits, and we all would have been out of luck. But it certainly is good that we do have this. I'm not the world's biggest technology person, but yes, this has certainly been a real lifesaver this past year.
So what else is up next for you?
Well, at this point, Well, immediately, as a matter of fact, we're as I said, we're finishing up 2 more music videos for the Dancing Beast, which will have original music and artwork and some narration from my friend. And so and we're going to start to do that because we're getting ready to move the promotion for the book into higher gear. I'm already talking to the school systems about how we're going to try and adapt for next year, some combination of in-person learning and remote. And also it's coming back up, at least up here, to season 4 outdoor music again. So I will be able to get out on the weekends and start playing for people again, and that will be great. So I'm looking forward to that.
So what kind of instruments do you play?
I'm primarily a guitar player. When I do the recordings here, I have a little multi-track recorder. I can play a couple of different guitar parts. I'll strum an acoustic part and then play an electric guitar on a guitar part on top. I'll play some bass guitar, and you can put them all on a thing and mix them up. And I have a friend who's a very good drummer, and so I send him the files, and he listens to that. He plays his drum part, and we mix them together. So I certainly miss sitting in a room with musicians and playing, and I'm looking forward to at least sitting on a deck someplace and playing with musicians again. But yes, but I'm primarily a guitar player. Yeah.
Now, where are you located at?
I'm in a place called Hewitt, New Jersey, which is probably about an hour and a half outside of New York City, just a little bit to the north and to the west.
Okay. Do they have mask mandates there?
We do. Yeah, we do. And actually, at least where we are here right now, I see very few people flouting the suggestions. So every once in a while, you see someone who's trying to make a point, and it's just after a while. But yes, we do have it. And how about down by you?
Yes, I'm in North Carolina, and we definitely have it. But a lot of people down south they think it's a hoax, so they don't want to wear the mask. They don't want to get the vaccine. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. And I'm like,
yeah, it's hard, and I understand because it's attached to so many other things. It's not just facts. It's culture. It's identity. If you say, well, I identify with this group, or my church does not believe, that's kind of hard to go up against when you're just sitting there with a chart and a graph.
Yeah.
So yeah, because there are hearts rule our heads a lot of the time. So yeah, but it's difficult. It isn't bad right here, and we're in a somewhat rural area, so it's not as bad either. But yeah, fortunately, when I do talk to my friends from New York City, people there are pretty good about that.
Well, I was wondering, because you said you're going to play outdoor, but you're going to have to wear a mask when you're playing as well? Or are you going to be socially distanced? Or
well, we will probably set up socially distant, and we put the mask on when you walk off the stage to go, to go down into the audience or something like that. Yeah, I'm assuming, because we're vaccinations are coming along here, but they're nowhere near universal, and so yeah, so probably. I've seen people already out there playing with a mask. Singing with a mask is a little tough, so we will probably just put the microphone 6 feet apart.
So do you sing as well?
I do. Yeah, I've always been more of a guitar player, but you can always find songs that are fun to sing, that people like to sing along with, that don't necessarily require a great voice. So I tend to do those. I'll do a song. So if I'm out, like I was talking to my brother the other day, and I said, if you're out there in front of a group of people and you start to play Wagon Wheel, you don't have to sing. They're going to sing the rest of the song for you. So I tend to do songs. I like to sing, but I tend to do songs that everybody else is going to want to sing along with. And as far as the rock and roll bands I was in and things, I was more of an accompanist. I was the guitar player in the band. So so that was always my role.
So let's talk about, in the very beginning of the interview, you said you switched from being on the road all the time because you had 2 small children.
Right.
A lot of musicians don't do that. A lot of musicians continue on. So what made you flip that switch and say?
Yeah, I do. And God bless so many of my musical heroes who stayed out there and did wonderful things out there. And I'm really glad that they did. But I just found for myself, I didn't really have this body of songs that I really had to have the world hear. I really liked playing and singing, but I can do that from here. So I think if I had this real need, you're in North Carolina. I'm a huge James Taylor fan. I think if I had James Taylor's talent and body of work and all the rest of that, I'd say, oh, I really should be out there. And it's difficult for my family, but I'll do the best I can. And people do. I know lots of people who raised children and did all the rest of that. And usually it requires a very patient spouse. But I was just finding for myself that the music was not so overwhelming that I couldn't do anything else. And especially when I found a related field. So I was still out there doing something musical, feeling like I was, a musician, and then playing on the weekends. But then, I was home in time to meet the school bus as often as not. And I think that's really what it came down to. If I had felt I had this body of music that really had to be out there, I think it would have been torn, because you feel it's something that you're trying to bring to the world. And really glad so many of my heroes did that. But I realized for me that was not the driving force. And then so when we had we had two formerly small children, and that just for me, that just kind of took over. I mean, that was where I wanted to be. So we had so yeah, I never ever felt like, oh, I should be this, I should be that. I was very, very happy to make the switch when I did.
So you didn't have any regrets of saying, I'm not going to?
No, I think, I there were times where I wish I was playing more often, but there were, we used to call up, I would talk to some of my old friends, and we would try and scare each other by saying, hey, let's get the band back together and get an old van, and people would go, ah. No, I love the music, but yeah, that part of it, that I didn't miss that part at all.
Yeah, you talked about musical heroes. You said Beatles was one of your. So let's talk about some of your musical heroes.
Oh, sure. Well, I would say it really came down to that. I mean, it was probably, certainly everybody else was happening around that time, but it had to be the Beatles, and I can't for the life of me figure out why I was not interested in music before then, and all of a sudden just absolutely had to have it. But certainly, the Beatles, and at that time was everything else that was coming along: the Rolling Stones, Beach Boys, and then you had all the great R&B records. You had Motown and the Southern stuff with Aretha Franklin, and it was such a fabulous time to be listening to music, and we played it all. We tried to play Motown songs, we tried to play Rolling Stones. And it was just, it was fun. And because we didn't have, you were talking about the internet before, because we didn't have the internet, we had to try and figure things out. There would be books of music, but they weren't terribly accurate as far as rock and roll was going. So you would have to sit down and play a record over and over and try and get every little note. And it was like being part of a secret society. If you knew a little something, you would pass it on to someone else. And it was just this fabulous time to be involved in music. And then again, probably, well, more than a few years later, but when James Taylor and those people came along, I really, really related strongly to that part. So, and then, so I started playing a lot more acoustic guitar and the rest. And there were, we had Joni Mitchell and Carole King and all the rest of these things. And as a matter of fact, two friends of mine and I, just before the pandemic, we had put together some programs, and one was an hour of British invasion music, starting and ending with the Beatles, and the other we did a Carole King and James Taylor tribute, an hour of their music, the things that they have done separately and together. And we would go to libraries and play those in concert, and that was great. I'm looking forward to doing that again when things open up.
Wow. Now, how old were you when you first picked up your first guitar?
13. 13. So yeah. So and I was horrible, absolutely terrible. Well, it's funny because most of the people I knew who picked it up and did well with it either had a little bit more of a knack. Some people just pick it up anything quicker than other people, and some people had that drive where they would just sit and practice for hours and hours. And I didn't have either. The only thing I had going was that I just didn't quit. I just kind of came back to it every day and slogged along. And I got fired from my first band twice. They kicked me out because I was terrible. But they had to keep taking me back because they were terrible too. And I was only slightly more terrible than they were. So, and the funny thing is, I'm thinking back when I was, I put a little bit of that story in this, and I was thinking, now how horrible could it be at 13 to have your friends throw you out of a band? And that must have been a terrible thing, but I didn't care. I just wanted to play. Right. So when we found out that they stunk too, so I said, all right, let's all stink together. And we finally got a little better. But yeah, I guess music is a great force if it can do that, right? If it can take a 13-year-old and make you completely forget the fact that your friends have rejected you. So yeah, it must have been such a powerful thing that maybe kept going back. And now, if I see any of those people now, we're still on good terms. So
you're still on good terms. I love that.
After all that. So, but yeah, it was a funny thing. It was just, who knows, something just clicks and you find this thing that's speaking to you. And yes, and it was really pretty funny because I really was not a quick study by any stretch of the imagination. And I didn't have a tremendous amount of patience when it came to practicing, but I just stayed with it. And I would give that advice to anybody, probably with anything, mostly music, because that's what I know a little more of. But if you just sit down every day, you will stink a little bit less after a while. And that was it. And I just found it really rewarding. All of a sudden you hit something and you get that little glimmer of light. It says, oh, wait a minute, that sounds like what I heard on that record. And sometimes that'll keep you going for a day. And that was what I found was really, really important with that. There was something in there that really connected and really made it worth the work. And then, it just didn't become work after a while. It became this thing that you wanted to do. And so we were sitting there and it was fun because in a band, you can sit there with your friends and you can have all sorts of interesting adventures. And fortunately, you still stay friends with these people after a while. But it is fun because you get all these little interactions with people, and it definitely shows you a lot about human nature to be in a band with somebody. So we found a lot of friendships were tested with things like that because there's a certain amount of pressure, and but for the most part, everybody seemed to come through it okay.
Okay, we do have a question from a viewer. It says, "Can you play a little something for us, John?"
Oh, okay. Let's see. How about this? This is a little bit unorthodox here, but let's try this. Since we're with product placement, so we have this. The Dancing Beast is the book, and the new video that's coming out, I have a theme which was based on a piece of 16th century music, and I decided to do something really strange with it, and it became the theme, and it's now the theme for the Dancing Beast. And so let me show you if I can. Let's see. A little bit of the original piece. This was a 16th century piece for the lute, the forerunner of the modern guitar. And when I was in college many, many years ago, there was this very nice piece from 16th century. It must have been a little dance tune. And I would practice that, and I would say, "Okay, it was a very nice little piece." It's a little tra-la-la if you're not careful. So I didn't really play it too much after a while. But then I was thinking, if you put it in a minor key, you get all of a sudden becomes a little more maybe mysterious sounding, and you can do something with it. You can do. Like that. Then all of a sudden became a little more mysterious. It became a little more like the theme for the Dancing Beast. And let's see. Like that. So we could do something there, which instead of that little happy major key, like that becomes something a little more spooky. And so I would take something like that, and a lot of the music that we used on the videos for the Dancing Beast was that. Some of it was based on actual pieces from the 16th century. And so I'm trying to think of, let's see, a couple of the other, see. Oh, this is a lot of fun. I should play a little bit of while we're here. The famous elbow mambo that I use with the special ed classes all the time. And again, it was really nice because I would have nonverbal kids coming up and requesting a song. And that one would go, do the elbow mambo, do the elbow mambo, do the elbow mambo, and you stop. Do the elbow mambo, do the elbow mambo, do the elbow mambo, and you stop. And the kids would laugh and the teachers would laugh. But the great thing was that some real work was getting done as far as the physical therapy side of things. So I would, I play some of these things really just for my own enjoyment, and some of them I do targeted to the kids, to the audience.
I love that. Now, if there is one person that you could, one musical hero, I'm putting you on the spot here, that you could play with, who would that be?
Oh, geez, that would be tough. I'm trying to think, because basically with a lot of my musical heroes, they're playing the part that I would play. So like, I certainly would love to have to work with James Taylor, but he's already doing the part that I would be playing. So I'd have to do something else. It'd be curious. I think, yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to see if I can think about something like that. Or I suppose if I were playing with James Taylor or somebody, I would come up with some different part for it. I'm a big fan of Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits, and so some things like that. And actually, when I was playing the little bit of the Dancing Beast theme, I remember thinking, boy, if I had Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull here along to play that flute on that would be a great thing to have Jethro Tull playing along on. So probably a lot of them. It would depend on the day, I think.
Yeah. And the person that requested is Margie. She says, thank you. Music speaks louder than words. She's the one.
My words, anyway. If that's what you're going to say, hello, Margie. How have you been? Hope you're all okay. Yeah. And Mark, yes. Okay. We won't give out any last names, but yes, her husband and I were in several bands together years ago. So.
Yeah, you have quite a few comments. Let's just go through. It says, hello, another Radar Ranger has joined the blog. Hi, John. Elbow bump. That's from Bob.
Right? Yeah, the Radar Rangers were the kids band that did the original recording of Do the Elbow Mambo.
So obviously, you said that you guys were still together. You were still friends, so right?
Yeah, right. Yep, the ones of us who are still here are still on speaking terms, so that's good. Let's see if this Barry here is the Barry I think it is. Hello, Barry. I'll talk to you later. So no, it is good because it's very interesting. I'm sure lots of people have experiences in work situations where there's personal issues and frictions and things, but and those are often worse in a band. But I have found that the people I worked with, even when we butted heads during the time of the band, we're usually still on speaking terms these years later.
Okay, we do have another request from Margie. She says, Larry requests trains passing in the night.
Right. Now, Margie is being silly, is what it is. Now, her husband and I were in a band, and it was essentially a vanity project for a manager's girlfriend. And one of the songs that they decided she sang very well was this song called Trains Passing in the Night, which, first of all, is a horrible song. And second of all, everybody even closely associated with the band can sing the entire song, even all these years later, even though we hated it. Matter of fact, I'm sure if I called my wife in from the next room and asked her, she could sing Trains Passing in the Night. And so could Margie. Horrible song that it was. So, absolutely awful song. But no, I will not play that. Sorry, Marge.
Now I'm going to have to look up that song since you said it's a horrible song.
But that one I think safely is probably off the airwaves here, because that one never made it. We did record it, but I hope no one ever heard it. So,
now our time is almost up. Is there anything that you want to leave us? One little last nugget that you want to leave us with?
I would say just that I guess you have a pretty diverse audience there, and so one thing I would say just is I think we should all keep ourselves open to trying things. I mean, if you think you can play an instrument, you should play an instrument. If you think you would like to write something, I mean, everybody should write something. We all have, everybody's got at least one book in them. I think, you can pick something in your life and write that book, or, or paint or something. I just think this stuff is so much more than just a hobby. It's really our connection to the world in a bigger way, I mean, depending on how people like the word spiritual, it's a loaded word, but it certainly connects us to the world in a much bigger way than a hobby. It's not just a pastime. So I think everybody should find that thing they do. You should cook, you should garden, you should do something with that real joy. And I hope everybody can.
And where can people find you at?
Okay, I think we had it down there someplace. The website for the book, there it is, the Dancing Beast book, and we are setting up a blog. So I will happily reply to anybody who would who wants to leave a message there. I am on Facebook under John Foley, and unfortunately there were about 30 or 40 John Foleys on there. I'm the one in Hewitt, New Jersey, and the little thumbnail photo actually has the cover of the book. So that would do that. But yes, anyone who wanted to get in touch by way of Facebook or Twitter, the Twitter is hashtag @DancingBeast. And so yes, I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about any of these things. And I really appreciate you having me on the show. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for coming on. I had fun. You're actually our first actual musical one. The parenting expert that I was talking about earlier, he was saying that he was learning ukulele during COVID. So I put him on the spot at the end. I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but I guess we can thank Margie for that.
Oh yeah, well, Margie, as they say, she has quite a sense of humor. So I'm glad you did. And actually, let's see, we can. Speaking of ukuleles, that's another thing everybody should have one of. Every child should be given a ukulele at birth. And let's see. And we can all play. We can sing our way out on this one. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Anyway, so yes, everybody should get one of these too. So, all right. And just because we need this stuff in our lives, probably more now than ever. But, even when things go back to what might have been called normal, I think we need this stuff in our lives. We need to get out and do something like that. But yes, but if I'd known, I probably would have put in a better microphone into the computer. I hope the sound quality was good.
Well, nobody's complaining that they can't hear us, so I'm assuming the sound quality is great.
Right. Well, that's why I always say, people say, how do you sing? I say, I sing loud. So
I love that. So, John, I want to thank you again. And when you get that trailer put up, let me know, and I'd be happy to put it up on the show for maybe a commercial in between for your books. Great.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I had a great time. I hope you did too.
Yes, I sure did. I love being serenaded.
Great. My pleasure.
So, guys, we will see you on the next chat from the Blog Cabin. Bye.
Okay. Everybody tune in again. Thanks. Bye-bye.